Thank you for joining us for today's event. My name is Bree Hogue, and I'm the sales manager of Powell City of Books here in Portland, Oregon. You can check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter too. Today, we are honored and excited to welcome Chloe Aridjis, Eduardo Halfon, Andres Newman, and Ilan Stavans. Their work is featured in the new book, And We Came Outside and Saw the Stars Again, Writers from Around the World on the COVID-19 Pandemic. Chloe Aridjis is the author of three novels, Book of Clouds, Asunder, and Sea Monsters, which was recently awarded the Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction. She was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2014 and the Eccles Center and Hay Festival Writers Award for 2020. Edward Halfon is the author of 14 books of fiction, including the award winning novel Morning. In 2018, he was awarded the Guatemalan National Prize in Literature, his country's highest honor. Andres Newman is the author of numerous novels, short stories, poems, aphorisms, and travel books. His novels include Traveler of the Century and Talking to Ourselves. His newest novel, Fracture, was published earlier this year. Today they are here to talk about the new anthology, And We Came Outside and Saw the Stars Again. This anthology features dozens of esteemed writers, poets, artists, and translators from more than 30 countries. As our world is transformed by the coronavirus pandemic, writers offer a powerful antidote to the fearful confines of isolation, a window into the lives and corners of the world beyond our own. Taking its title from the last line of Dante's Inferno, when the poet and his guide emerge from hell to once again behold the beauty of the heavens, the anthology offers a profound global portrait of the defining moment of our time and sends a clarion call for solidarity across borders. Joining them today in conversation is author, professor, and publisher Ilan Stavans. Ilan is the editor of this anthology and the publisher of Restless Books. He is the recipient of numerous awards and honors, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, Chile's Presidential Medal, and the International Latino Book Award and the Jewish Book Award. Today's event will include a conversation by our panelists, followed by a Q&A. If you have a question for any of our authors, please click on that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type in your question. They will get to those questions towards the end of our event, but first we're going to start with a conversation. You can support our authors by purchasing a copy of And We Came Outside and Saw the Stars Again from powells.com. A link to purchase the anthology will be included in the chat. As well, Restless Books will donate net proceeds from this anthology to the Book Industry Charitable Foundation, an organization which provides resources and financial support to booksellers. Chloe, Eduardo, Andres, Ilan, it is such a pleasure to welcome you to Powell's Books. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Bree, very much. And I want to start by thanking Powell's for opening the doors to us. We are in the United States in the middle of two pandemics, not one. The pandemic that is affecting the rest of the world and that has made us more introspective and isolated as a result, and the virus of a political division that is shaking the world in general, but this country in particular. I want to start by acknowledging the role that bookstores play as gathering places for democracy, where we engage in a civil way on our differences and our similarities and are able to talk to one another, something that appears to me that we have forgotten. And probably I don't have to say this to this audience, but we all need to vote regardless of our ideological persuasion. That is the voice that we all strive for. I am thrilled to be with these three extraordinary authors who I have admired for many years and have been close to in one way or another, sometimes as a friend, sometimes as a translator, sometimes simply as a distant reader. I am thrilled to be able to engage them in conversation, and maybe at some point during this conversation to ask them to read something that they included in this anthology. I'm going to start with Chloe, if I can. Chloe, are you fed up with COVID, the way half of the world is? Tell me about the waves that you've gone through since the very beginning on the pandemic.
Well, of course, I think we probably experienced, towards the end of March, early April, similar tremendous anxiety and just the uncertainty of the magnitude. Well, we sensed the enormity of what was coming, but not quite how many people were going to die, whether it was going to be like wartime, that you were going to be separated for years from your family. And my parents are in Mexico, my sister's in New York with my niece, and there was a moment in early April when I didn't know whether to just pack up my flat and go to Mexico and wait it out there. But I have a cat here and my whole routine and home. So I didn't really want to leave. And then I would have, but my parents said, let's each just wait it out in our own homes and hope that, well, by summer, both my parents turned 80 this year. We weren't able to be together, but, and the first month was extremely quiet here in London. But as many of you probably know, this government, like several others, has been quite shambolic and non-committal. So it was always a semi-lockdown and with very mixed messaging, and the construction, manufacturing, they were so scared about harming the economy that so much was allowed to continue during the lockdown. So total silence there never was. And we never were really able to control this pandemic here. What's really helped me is, and I think many people around the world, is activism. So here, well, I know, especially in the United States, you had Black Lives Matter in here too. And for me, it was, I'm part of Writers Rebel, which is a group from Extinction Rebellion. And so we still had our weekly Zooms. And then in September, there was, I think, protest. It's very cathartic. And then you have a sense of community and reminder of the outside world. And for me, it's been, apart from writing, and well, we'll probably just later talk about what we've each been working on, but apart from my own activities, which just suddenly at moments felt, I don't know, irrelevant, and it was just so hard to know what world one's writing into and what matters. Looking at things I had written in January, I felt so distanced and disconnected from it all. But what really has helped enormously this year was just becoming a slightly more of an activist, which in the past I hadn't been, but in September I spoke we had an event, our Writers Rebel group, and so protesting the climate emergency, but also species extinction. And just coming to last night, we had with Animal Rebellion, an anti-hunting protest until the police arrived. But it's actually just been extremely cathartic to do that, and a release of tension.
Mm-hmm. Eduardo, Chloe mentions that at times it feels as if this is war, and that there have been dramatic changes in the way she sees the pre-COVID Chloe to the present COVID Chloe. I'd love for you to also reflect on the difference between the pre-Eduardo and the present Eduardo. But in your case, in your piece in the anthology, makes it very clear. An added element is there, and that is that you have a 4-year-old that has utterly transformed your life and would have anyhow, with or without a pandemic.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Powell's, thank you for having us. It's one of my favorite places on earth. I just wish we could have met there.
Yes.
Instead of London and Granada and south of France and Massachusetts. I think, for me, the biggest change has been this feeling. It's more of a feeling, no? Because since we've been in France, this hit us as guests in France. We were in Paris for the first lockdown. I was there with a fellowship. So it felt surreal to be in Paris, in an empty Paris. It felt very vulnerable to be outside of your comfort zone. I didn't have a doctor. I didn't know who I would call. I didn't know the emergency number that I would have to call. I didn't know anything. So the feeling that during the first lockdown was very, very disconcerting internally. But I think for me, the biggest change, if I have to summarize it, which is what you're asking, between the Eduardo before the pandemic and now, as you know, I've moved all my life. Mm-hmm. I've been a nomad my entire life. I was born in Guatemala, grew up in the States, then went back to Guatemala, then went to Nebraska, then went to Iowa, then went to, I've always felt as if I could go anywhere at any time. And now I can't. And now, so that mobility now feels restricted. We were talking before we went live. I'm in the south of France, and we're here almost because we could not leave France. When my fellowship ended, which was in May, the Guatemalan airport was closed. I could not go back there. Flights were a mess. The pandemic in Guatemala has gotten out of control, even worse now. So we sort of felt that our best option was to stay put for the time being. So that feeling of not deciding if I can go or stay, or where I can go or where I can stay is a little new to me. Mm-hmm. And fatherhood, as you know, was what really affected me during the lockdown, and it's still there. It's still there. I'm still struggling to balance that out, especially with the writing, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a bit. But during the lockdown, I was basically a father, not a writer. I was busy keeping him busy.
But you speak in the past tense. I was basically a father. Is this no longer the case?
Well, it started 2 days ago again. No, we're in a new lockdown now.
Yeah.
A little bit different this time because schools are in session. So the French government decided to go back into lockdown on Friday, but schools are in session. So tomorrow he goes to school. And so if he can go to school, then I can go to work at home. No, I can sort of do something. And we're not in Paris anymore. We're now in the south of France, in a very, very small town where it doesn't feel as aggressive. At least it doesn't yet. And I've been through this before, so it's not new now. We've been there before. I know how to do the attestation, the little piece of paper you need with you when you go for your hour's walk during the day. So maybe it's not as new as it was before. So maybe, past tense about that.
Andres, you have written one of the first, maybe the first book that I read of yours goes back to the Enlightenment, and it's an exploration of ideas in a most sophisticated way. You've written about the past, the present, and the future, and the piece that you have in the anthology, I know it well because I translated it myself, is a kind of revisiting of the Genesis story from the perspective of COVID-19. Were we fools, Andres, in not imagining the future that we are in?
I don't think so. I think that our era is constantly abusing the need to imagine the future, and that kind of takes away from us the battles of the present. So I think that future always manages to surprise us, even though in this case was a harder future to imagine than other futures. But I think that the present is the most urgent thing, not because the future doesn't need to be built, but precisely because the foundation of that future is the everyday present. Mm-hmm. So I think in fact, I think that the pandemic kind of sharpened our past conflicts. I know that it's very tempting to say everything changed, we're not gonna be the same, the world changed forever. I can see why we might be led to think that way, of course, and there are points good points to support that vision, certainly. But to maybe to find some counterpart, some counter argument, I think that Freud was saying that everything was about sex. Well, we could add everything is about death. So I mean, in a way, mortality, our own mortality or other people's mortality, is the only thing that matters in a way. And a pandemic kind of restart your not only priorities but themes. But again, all writing is about sex or death or both. So in a way, it kind of didn't change anything. But
and are you fed up with all this? How are you?
Totally. I mean, I as everybody else, I am totally fed up. But Eduardo said something really interesting about imagining your former traveling self. I do, as everybody here in this panel, usually travel a lot, like 6 months, a year out of home. So I had never been for so long at home since 1998. I did the numbers the other day. In the last half of my life had been abroad more than now. And that I think that is a change in the way I see my own roots. Because there's a, I don't know how you feel, guys, about that, but there's a contradictory consequence. Because on the one hand, my roots are larger at home. I was forced to commit with my house and my daily home life in a way that I didn't need to in the past. So you could say my roots are larger, but on the other hand, those larger roots are weaker because I cannot come back home anymore. The free sensation of saying I choose to come back. I cannot come back the way I am now, the place I am now, and that is changing a bit the frame. And there's another thing really interesting to me about the pandemic. I mean, all death and losses aside, of course, I'm not gonna go there because I mean, we all know that. No? It's not that it's not important, but we all know. It's this idea that it doesn't matter what happens elsewhere. This is a Chinese thing. Oh, that's the neighbor. That that won't affect me. And this leads me to what Chloe was saying about activism. We were really reminded that everything matters everywhere, and we're gonna be affected by what the others do. But we are not able to change as a community, because even in the second wave, I was listening these stupid ideas about, oh, Spain is worse now, France is safe. Oh, it was China, not us. Then it was Italy, not us. Then it was South Europe, not us. And in the second wave, we're insisting in this stupid idea that we're not like our neighbors. And we should really stop that, because otherwise we will be very bad narrators of our own world.
Well, I want to go back to you with a thought that happened at the very beginning when we were putting together the anthology, and that is that it was March, and the suggestion was that we wanted to have a record of the overwhelming emotions that we were all experiencing, and that this was as global a moment, connected with what Andres was saying, as global a moment as anyone we could experience. We were all contemporaries of each other. And at the same time, there was in my mind this tension between journalism as the first draft of history and literature as the second draft. You wait until things happen in order to reflect, to look back. But I didn't want to wait. I wanted to be right there and have the writers who are the authors of the second draft become the authors of the first draft, to be right at the forefront. So I'd like to ask you about writing. How, we writers are generally isolated. We live on our own, in battling our own ghosts. And now everybody is isolated on our own in battling our own ghosts. How has your writing changed in these months, Chloe.
That's yeah. Well, yes, I think we've all been forced. We're all in the prisons of our life decisions, and you're really forced to confront so many of the decisions you've made, where you live, whether you live far from your family, what family structure you have, etc. For me, I just wanted to say I agree with Andres that I've very much refused to have this narrative, to accept the narrative of the post-COVID, the world will have changed entirely, and the permanence of the current situation. And I know it has been very traumatic for everyone and globally. Just to be aware of the fragility of our species in a way that we never have been before, and for it to affect every single country, just about every single country in the world, except for maybe tiny remote islands. But I finished a draft of the new novel in late August, late July, and let it sit for a few months, and I've only recently returned to it. It's the longest I've let something sit. But there is this, I don't know, this uncertainty and opacity to everything. I didn't trust the decisions I would make if I started a new draft or revision in August. And so I've let it sit, and I focused a bit on nonfiction pieces. Meanwhile, I went to Berlin. What was really interesting was, apart from this tiny trip to Berlin for 5 days in September, I've been here since early January when I returned from Mexico. But in Berlin, I wrote a piece just now for the London Review of Books about Abi Warburg, about the German cultural historian, who was such a fascinating figure. So I went to Berlin for 5 days to see an exhibition. And since I lived in that city for many years, it was so strange because it's so abstract that every single other city and country is going through this. It was so strange to be on the U-Bahn, on the S-Bahn, and see everyone there masked and all the familiar spaces, and just to see other societies going through the exact same thing. And but anyway, so I went and I spent a lot of time in museums, which I hadn't done here, and flew back. And of course, it was very strange being on airplanes. And so I'm working on essays mostly, because somehow there's more clarity, and because you can just focus with fiction, you can just go in any direction. And there's a question of whether whatever we write next will be somehow, how much documentation, journalistic documentation of the moment there will be, whether we'll channel that into nonfiction, whether our fiction will become more allegorical somehow. And I think that will happen a lot. And I remember early on in The Guardian, there was an interview with an editor who said, we do not want 200 COVID, novels about confinement a year from now.
Yeah, people don't want to be reading about it either.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
Would you read the poem that you have in the anthology about distance?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I wrote it early on when this constant. Well, yeah, I'll read it. So it's called Measure of a Distance. So, our heads are now fitted with imaginary rulers with which we take imprecise measurements and run calculations. I stand 2 meters away from the tall woman being pulled down the street by her restless Alsatian. 2 meters from my 78-year-old poet friend who lives around the corner and hasn't left his house in 6 weeks. 2 meters from the imprint of the local junkie who usually haunts the entrances of Tesco and Pret-a-Manger. 2 meters from my neighbor sitting on her steps having tea and a cigarette in her pajamas at midday. 2 meters from the empty ghost buses at Angel Station, where now only essential workers and celestial beings alight. 2 meters from the closed chocolatier, whose window arrangements serve as reminders of the futility of human endeavor. 2 meters from my local pub, where the menu from the last night it was open is still visible on the blackboard near the window. 2 meters from the aging goth in a leather jacket standing in front of me in the queue outside the supermarket. 2 meters from the desire to destroy the mental ruler and overcome the 2 meters. So
beautiful, beautiful. Eduardo, I want to ask you about distances, the 2 meters or the 6 feet that we all have, and the way that we now are normal if we use masks, hiding a part of our face. And I'd love to get a reflection from you on relating to the rest of us as images on a screen, and what that does to you. On the one hand, I can say that it's incredibly frustrating to reduce my friend Eduardo to the size of one of my fingers. On the other hand, I would say that this idea of social distancing in my case is facetious, because I have been in touch with many more people in the last 6 or 7 months through this little grills that we have in front than probably on a normal day in terms of dialogue and encounter. What is your relationship with masks, your relationship with faces in this last few months?
Oh, what a good question. I'm going to have to reflect.
You can answer tomorrow, Eduardo.
I can think about
Sorry
it.
to offend.
Okay.
What about you?
We have until tomorrow? Okay. And by the way, I just want to say, Andres, ¿verdad? We were forced to wear black. They made us
I
wear
can
black.
see the three of you. We're
I have a heartbeat on mine, you see.
okay.
That wasn't allowed in my contract. So did you get that clause of wearing a red line? I'm so jealous. My contract was just black.
So Ilan, I empathize, because as I mentioned, I was in Nebraska for 8 years and didn't see a soul.
Yeah.
I saw nobody. Nobody comes through Nebraska. I could absolutely hide. Nobody knew I was a writer there. I wasn't a writer there. I was the husband of my wife, who was there doing her doctorate. Yeah. So I was just in my little room doing my little things. I didn't see anybody. Since this began in March, I see everybody, because now, and everybody sees your house. No, you welcome everybody into your house.
Your books.
This is. I have no books here. This is not my house. But into your space, no? Yeah. And even though it's virtual and it's not really real, and I've gone to more book fairs, I've participated in more events than I had in the 8 years that I was in Nebraska.
Yeah, yes.
So traveling, a different type of traveling has become available to us.
And it's kind of weird that we are in people's, living rooms and dining rooms, and sometimes bedrooms, with such ease, and that the kind of the bridge between what is so private and what is so public now is not the same. It's not the same.
It's not the same, and it's very interesting. It's interesting not only to experience as a writer, but also as a reader. No, as a reader, I see my writers, the writers I read, I now see where they work, and I can hear them talk a little. Writers that would probably not have participated in that many things before are now more available. Now, the second part of your question, do we have a mask on now as we do this? No? Yeah. Are we wearing a mask, a different type of mask? Not the mask that we wear when we go outside, but are these events also prompting us to put on some sort of a facade or a disguise, or some, this is my public persona now in these events. But it's very interesting. It is a new way of relating.
You don't show what you don't want to show.
Exactly. Exactly.
Most of our bodies, even so.
Exactly. You don't see, Andres. We don't see that you're wearing pajamas and I'm wearing slippers, and my bed is over there unmade. Yeah, you show what you want to show, but that.
So you're taking for granted I do wear pants. That's good.
Well, we both know that's not true.
Andres, I growing up in Mexico, like Chloe, did you grow up in Mexico? Yeah. Growing up in Mexico, there was always, dreaming of becoming a writer. Octavio Paz was an important figure, and he wrote this celebrated book, The Labyrinths of Solitude, a chapter of which deals with masks. And the summary of that chapter is that masks for Mexicans hide their true self. But I was talking the other day with a rabbi who was referring to a section in the Talmud where it is said that actually a mask can actually reveal who we are rather than hide who we are. That a mask can be even more authentic or genuine, bona fide. Then, so what is your relationship with all this of the spaces and of the faces that we in the technology? How would you take that, Andres?
That was for me. Well, I think that again leads us to a very classic theme, which is the function of carnival and the disguise. Is the disguise a release of a repressed identity that we are only allowed to express when we put on a mask, or is it a way to hide who we really are? Literature shows us that there are masks inside masks inside masks. We know that the first person, intimate first person, can be a literary maneuver, the same way that what we choose to show about our houses. We're writers, so we show books, but I can show you my shower, which is a mess. But bad connection, that's why. So yes, I mean, I'm really interested that Chloe read a poem, and I also contributed with a poem because
why don't you read it too? I'd love for you.
I'm gonna do that gladly. But what I was thinking is the function of poetry for me as a reader in these last few months, because since, as I said in the beginning, this kind of took us back to the 3 or 4 great themes updated to the current situation. I feel like reading and writing poetry gives us the basics we need, as essential food. And on the other hand, I was thinking that when the pandemic began, I was searching for the so-called Spanish peste. How do you say peste? Fever.
The fever.
Or no,
Yeah, the flu.
plague.
Exactly.
The plague.
flu.
The plague.
Yeah, the plague.
Spanish
The
flu.
1918 flu that actually I think it began in Kansas, if I'm not wrong, but it ended up called the Spanish flu because as Spain was neutral during the World War One, then the press was more free to talk about it, but it was the entire continent, European continent, which had it, and lasted for 2 years, and it killed 25 million people. 25 million people. And so I was searching for the books back then talking about that, and I was surprised to see that not many people wrote about that, and it didn't um, it didn't leave a legacy of great novels and poems on the topic. I found it hard to detect good works about that. That makes me think that maybe we'll need to build as well the future, as you said, full of books talking about something else, because that's as well what we need during a pandemic. But yes, I'm gonna read the poem.
Sure. And I'd love for you to, since it's in Spanish, why don't you read it in Spanish and in English?
Okay, I can certainly do that. Yes. The poem it came to my mind watching the Pope that day. He gave mass for the empty square. That made me think about the contradiction of transcendental needs in a moment where the square but empty, and apparently no one was listening to what the Pope had to say. So it was a powerful image for me, the need of, for many people who are religious, to reconnect with God or transcendental thoughts, and at the same time nobody could attend this ritual. So the poem goes like this in English first. And the Pope said amen in the empty square, and no one answered from the clouds, and no one answered from the mirror, because all voices were beneath the ground, sweetly cradled to cease existence. And the stock exchange swelled its lung, and counted the oxygen in coins, and rerouted its wind toward some islands, soon to the sea with sotter boons, only for lizards and exceptions. And all countries became one, but especially themselves, since many needed to choose between virus and bread, and a few saved a piece of future in the freezer. And supermarkets were crowded with animals in search of animals, with families in white that grazed in a field of alcohol, paper, and plastic, and gloves keying the fear code. And each hospital became tempest, and roofs rained, and doors flew, and the thread of life became clear-cut, and truth came and went in hallways without being asked any questions. And grandparents could see with skin like fishing nets, and hands stained with memory, and eyes blinded by lucidity, their rights turned into numbers. And technology was flesh in those who already had it, and ghost in those with only body. And we sang rhyming songs promising never to forget. And very soon our voices went quiet in the usual places, in multiple corners, with the flies buzz in that devil's limbo, which is the border between song and silence, between mourning and amnesia. Sorry about the pronunciation.
Beautiful.
Accidental poetry. And now that was a beautiful translation by Ilan, by the way, and this is the original, which is much worse, but the sound will be better. Génesis COVID-19:1. Y el Papa dijo amén en la plaza vacía, y nadie respondió desde las nubes, y nadie respondió desde el espejo, porque todas las voces estaban bajo tierra, dulcemente acunadas por dejar de existir. Y la bolsa se hinchó como un pulmón y contó las monedas del oxígeno y desvió su aire hacia unas islas amarradas al mar con puntos de sutura donde solo hay lagartos y excepciones. Y todos los países fueron uno, pero más todavía cada cual, porque muchos debieron elegir entre virus y panes y unos pocos guardaron un trozo de futuro en la nevera. Y los supermercados se poblaron de animales en busca de animales, de familias pastando en las praderas, de alcohol, papel y plástico, y los guantes tecleaban el código del miedo. Y cada sanatorio fue tormenta, y los techos llovieron, y las puertas volaron, y el hilo de la vida se hizo nítido, y en los pasillos iba y venía la verdad, sin que nadie pudiera preguntarle. Y las abuelas, los abuelos, vieron con sus pieles de redes pescadoras, con las manos manchadas de memoria, con los ojos cegados de tanta lucidez, transformarse el derecho en aritmética. Y la tecnología se hizo cuerpo en quien ya la tenía, y fue fantasma para quienes tan solo tenían cuerpo. Y cantamos canciones que rimaban y dijimos que nunca olvidaríamos. Y muy pronto las voces nos quedamos calladas, en el lugar de siempre, en los rincones, con zumbidos de mosca, en un limbo diabólico que es frontera entre el canto y el silencio, entre el luto y la amnesia de estar vivos.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
Felicidades. It has the biblical voice, the prophetic voice. And I love the fact also that in English you speak English with an accent, and in Spanish you speak Spanish with a beautiful Argentine accent.
Ilan, but only when he reads poetry.
Oh, yeah?
Andres, I've told you this before. When he reads poetry, the Argentine
Se le sale el argentino.
Se le sale el argentino. Because when you speak to him in Spanish, it sounds a blend of Granada and Argentina.
That's what I am, so makes sense.
I know.
And both Chloe and Andres contributed to the anthology with poetry, but you, Eduardo, contributed with a beautiful essay about your son and about an image of a chimpanzee that you conveyed to your son. Why don't you also read us 2 or 3 paragraphs? Or
Yeah. I'd love to, Ilan. I'd love to. You know what I was thinking? While Chloe was answering a little while ago about how we're doing with our writing, something happened. For me, writing is about feeling safe. Yeah, I can't write in bars. I can't write it while I'm traveling. Andresito, I think you can. No, you can write in hotels when you travel.
Yeah, I love hotels.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We've talked about this before. I can't. I'm a very not only a creature of my house, but of my routine. I can only write at a certain time. Everything has to be absolutely perfect. It's very neurotic. No, it's very neurotic. I understand, but it's my neuroses, and I have to take care of that. No, so
Exactly.
what happens when your world is turned upside down, as it was in late March? I stopped writing. I just didn't feel safe. You know, I used my son as an excuse, probably. You know, he's home, he's loud, but I could have written at night. I could have written, you know, I could have sequestered myself into the bathroom if I needed to. We were in a big apartment. But something happened that I wasn't expecting. And this is perhaps another answer to your first question of what changed in me. I started writing in English.
Oh,
As some of you know, I think, Chloe, you might not know this, Andres, you know this. I think in English. English became my strong language when I turned 10 and we left Guatemala, and I grew up in the States, and it just replaced Spanish. But for some reason, when I started writing in my late 20s, I wrote in Spanish, and I've written for almost 18 years now in Spanish, 14 books in Spanish, thinking in English, but writing in Spanish.
You're translating in your head.
It somehow comes out in Spanish, Chloe. I have no idea how this happens. And at the beginning of my writing time, those first few books, English was very present. You know, the syntaxis and the grammar and the word. I would use too many adverbs, for example. Something in Spanish, it's very heavy in Spanish. In English, it's softer. My comma placement. My Spanish is still very influenced by English, I think. It's a very economical prose, etc. But for some reason, I never made the switch. I thought, Ilan, that when I went to live in Nebraska, that would do it. And it didn't. I kept going in Spanish. Something happened during the pandemic. And I think the only way I can explain it is I didn't want to write. You know, I had my new book ready, which is coming out or almost ready, which is coming out in January. And I didn't want to write anymore. And suddenly I received an email from Matt Seaton in the New York Review of Books asking me to do something I don't really like doing, which is more akin to journalism. Write about this moment. I don't like that. I like the second draft, as you beautifully described it.
okay.
I'm not a journalist. I don't like to accept those types of commissions because I don't know how to do it. I don't like deadlines. I don't know what's going to come out. But I wrote a small piece very rapidly because I had lived it that morning, the first day of lockdown, in English. And then you called and asked about another piece, and I wrote that one in English. And since then, I've been writing in English.
Oof. Do you feel like a traitor to Spanish?
No. Good. No. I feel that now I need to start writing in French.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that. Beautiful, Eduardo.
So this piece, which is called Wunda, came out of the lockdown. I'll read it. We'll see where I stop.
Sure.
It's been 3 weeks of lockdown in Paris. The street outside my window seems smaller and emptier every day, as if people were more and more afraid to venture out, whether it be for a brief walk or to forage for food. As the number of deaths continues to rise, the French government recently announced even stricter measures. Only one outing allowed per day, 1 hour per outing, within a 1 kilometer radius of home. The world outside my window is, in fact, getting smaller. During these past 3 weeks, I've been almost exclusively a father. I feel as if I'm no longer a writer. Writing now doesn't matter anymore, or it doesn't matter much, or it matters less than making sure that my 3-year-old son sees this new reality as if it were some kind of adventure. We go outside once a day in the early afternoon for a short walk or a ride on a scooter around the neighborhood, always making sure not to touch anything and to keep away from the few pedestrians and joggers. The rest of the time, at home, we make up games where there were none before. Snapping off the shoots of spinach leaves, learning to pick up scraps of paper with a pair of small tweezers, creating complex designs on the floor with his collection of used metro tickets, making a family of porcupines out of Play-Doh and dry spaghetti. As I see it, my primary occupation has been keeping everything that's going on as far away from him as possible. The lockdown, the virus, the uncertainty, the overall sense of panic, the soaring number of sick and dead. And for the most part, I'd succeeded. Or so I thought. Some days ago, I showed my son the short video of a chimpanzee clinging on to Jane Goodall in what appears to be a grateful embrace. I explained to him that the chimpanzee's name was Wunda, and that Goodall and her team were releasing Wunda again into the jungle of the Congo after it had been rescued and rehabilitated. And my son, as soon as the video ended, started to sob uncontrollably. At first, I was almost proud of his tears, which I interpreted as empathy or emotional intelligence. And maybe they were, at least in part. But then I couldn't help wonder how much built up frustration he was also releasing in those tears, how much sadness he had been storing up all these weeks and hiding from his father. At some level, and despite our best efforts, I know my son feels what's going on. He senses something in his world has been broken, perhaps permanently. The first thing he asked every morning, still in bed, is if today he finally gets to return to his school, see his teachers, go to the Jardin du Luxembourg to run and play in the sandbox and scoot around with his friends. My son, I know, is starting to miss being a kid. A few days have passed now since he saw the video, but he still talks constantly about Dr. Goodall, he calls her Jane, and about Wunda. This afternoon, while we were lying in his bed trying to nap, I happened to record him telling Wunda's story in his own way, in his own words. And as I listened to him, I thought of a woman and her team healing a chimpanzee, and a chimpanzee healing a son, and a son healing a father.
I love that piece. I love it. Though I said that it is in prose, and it is in prose, at least on the page, it does feel so poetic.
I'd say lyrical more than poetic. I'm not as close to poetry as Andres is. I am as a reader, but not as a writer. But music, Andres, we've talked about this many times. Andres is a son of two violinists, no? Tus papás? Tu mamá y tu papá?
Oboist and violins, yes.
Yeah. And I'm a frustrated musician, so when I'm writing music, is extremely important in the words.
We have about 10 minutes to go, and I want to invite the audience to send questions through the Q&A. And I will be reading them. I would like to spend, Zoe, just a few minutes, a minute or two, in politics. It seems to me that one thing that the pandemic has done is kind of exacerbated our fraught relationship with our political figures and our governments, and be frustrated by the hats that they sometimes take as if they were doctors. And I've always been at awe by your activism and by the activism of your father, who is a man Homero Aridjis, who I admire enormously. And so I don't have really a specific question, but I have that broad theme of our relationship with government, or our relationship with political figures, and the drive that we have to being pushed to stay at home, also march and protest and complain. Anything you want to say?
Well, I was Eduardo's piece, I was so moved by it also because for me, I've thought so much about our connection to other species, and because it's been so much about human survival and just making sure that humans get rid of COVID. But I remember that we vanquish it and return to normal. But especially in April, I know I was one of many who had fantasies of a global reset. Somehow the planet, without humans, and urban spaces being reclaimed by nature. You had herds of deer hanging out in gardens in East London, and families of javali, of wild boar, prancing down the street in Barcelona, and just you have these visions of what the planet would be if we weren't just overrun by our species. But and of course, early on, there were so many articles about bats and pangolins and all these really long suffer, especially pangolins, but these species that suffer so much at our well, some hands, but and just it's begun to fade, and I don't want it to fade, but that feeling that one had early on of, oh, maybe, yes, we won't return to what it was, and somehow everyone, governments, and there'll just be this tremendous awakening, and people will fly less, corporations, fossil fuels, everything will just stop, and things will, we'll find a new way of living, and now it's, yes, none of us know what next year will be and what world we'll enter. I love the title of the book also because it's just that thought of also just out in nature, and that the sky has stayed more or less the same. Well, there are fewer planes crossing it, but that sense of nature in some way carrying on or even thriving in our absence. But and of course, so many politicians in the countries where, I mean, what's happening in Brazil is just, how can one sleep at night just thinking of the Amazon and yeah, but I just feel it's so important to not forget other species during this all, and in this survival, this tremendous focus on survival of our own. But I hope that whatever recovery finally does take place, that it'll somehow be good for other species as well.
Not to mention that the virus might very probably have to do with how we treat animals to start with. So I mean, is that related?
Exactly.
Two ideas come to my mind about this very, very quickly. First one is that in spite of their over-presence, if English allows me to say it that way, I don't think so, but in spite of the over-presence, they don't matter that much on the one hand, as the noise is not equal to the importance. And on the other hand, I think that we've all felt the need of public care and public protection more than usual. And particularly in the States, I understand this is like a central discussion. Yes. I mean, here in Spain, we are supposed to have, yes, an endangered and precarious and so on and on, but still universal gratuit healthcare system. So nobody is arguing that shouldn't be that way. But I think in the state that is really an important theme to rethink. And but beyond the public care, the sense that when you think everything goes well, you can immerse yourself in the fiction of individual destiny and the self-made person, blah, blah, blah. But then when you need a community to protect each other, you do realize that there's a structure that needs attention for when these moments arrive. And the second idea is that in spite of, we are talking about politicians, and of course in the United States, is extremely important because we are on the verge of making a very important decision, not only for the States, but for the entire planet, I'm afraid. But putting that aside, the civil and individual responsibilities have been highlighted these months, because it's not only what the council does or the government does, but everything that every single neighbor does matters. And we shouldn't forget that when this hopefully ends.
Absolutely. I want to add, I want to hear from you too, Eduardo, but here in the United States, it has become frighteningly clear that the virus has widened the divisions, not only political, but of the haves and the have-nots, and people of color, the Blacks, Latinos have the deaths are much higher, the infections degrees are much higher, and because of what you're saying, Andres, the health system is in such disarray that there is no response, or there is an overwhelming sense of inefficacy by what is happening, while at the same time, the first responders, the doctors, are doing whatever they can in order to tackle the situation. Eduardo, any thoughts on the politics of the moment? I know it's such a broad question. And I want to just mention something quickly. There's a beautiful, not only in the Q&A, but also in the chat, a beautiful reflection connected with something that you said before about the question about proximity and being far, and about a particular story that this commentator is talking about, lejano, and what does it mean to be far away from others? What does it mean to be the other for others? At the time of the pandemic.
Yeah. Thank you, Anne, for the nice comment. Lejano, or distant, is the title of the story in English, and it goes well with this question, Ilan. I'm going to try to make some sort of sense of this. Lejano is a story about the two Guatemalas, to put it bluntly, and how far or how distant they are from each other. The Guatemala of the haves and the Guatemala of the have-nots, to use your terminology. It's really a story about one Mayan poet who I had as a student in a very private university, so a very, very rich university in Guatemala. Gave a scholarship to this one student who needed to be there, and who eventually the system kicked out, and he was expelled. And him, this one young kid, exemplified for me the country, and this eternal conflict between everything that's going on in a place like Guatemala and in a place like the United States, where that other reality is so close, yet at the same time so distant from you. No, so I think that's what Anna's referring to. Right. So right now we're distanced from each other, but that's a different type of distance. That's a different type of politics. It's a different reaction to a pandemic. I don't have to see Andres to feel close to him. He knows this. We love each other very much. We've been friends for a long time. We miss our lobbies. We usually talk in hotel
Tell
lobbies.
that joke, please. Our Jewish joke, please. You have to. Ilan,
This is our Jewish joke.
We're all Jewish. The four of us are Jewish.
Well, the four of us are Jewish. Yeah. What's the joke, Andres?
Our lobbies. Our lobbies.
It's our Jewish lobbies. Yeah, we meet at book festivals and we're busy all day, but we meet at 2 a.m. in the lobby and put each other up to speed.
But every time we're gonna meet, we say, let's do a bit of Jewish lobby, and everybody gets nervous.
Yeah.
But we're just meeting at the hotel lobby.
Yeah, it's not lobbying, not lobbying, but lobby.
Exactly.
Yeah. So distance is not. There's no relationship between distance and proximity, emotionally, and politically as well. You can be very active, as Chloe has been saying, without being there. My way of doing activism in Guatemala is writing about Guatemala. I'm not there. I haven't been there since I was born, but I can point to that situation. I can shed a little bit of light on something I saw, and hopefully some reader finds that beautiful, and then my job is done.
It has been terrific, really, to talk, to hear you speak in this kind of aleph, from different parts of the world into my screen and into many people's screen, and now to have Chloe's cat.
Yes, lovely. Let's see the cat.
He's a Greek
Beautiful.
cat.
He's a Greek cat.
Yeah, from Hedron.
I want to thank you all for participating in the anthology, for your deep and powerful reflections, for your patience and for your honesty too, and again to Powell for allowing us to come together. Back to you, Bree.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you for joining us and to everyone who was able to log in today for this event. It's been such a pleasure to have Chloe, Eduardo, Andres, and Ilan with us. The new book is called And We Came Outside and Saw the Stars Again, Writers from Around the World on the COVID-19 Pandemic. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you. Hasta
Thank
luego.
you. Thank you.
Thank you
Have a
so
good
much.
day. Thank you.
Chao, Andrés.
Chao,
Cuídense.
amigo, hermano,
Gracias a
hasta
todos.
pronto. Cuídense,
Estén muy
Chloe,
bien, ¿eh?
Ilan.
Chao.
Chao,
Take care,
Ilan.
Gusto,
everybody.
gusto en hablar. Chao, chao.
Yes. Bye.